Welcome to the Catholic Christian. We have an interesting guest today, Cade from Minnesota, now in Denver. He grew up as a Catholic, lukewarm Cafeteria Catholic, went down a rad trad rabbit hole, and unfortunately stepped away from the church and is now an in-between agnostic atheist kind of belief. So, Cade, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Today was a nice toasty day, and I'm excited for summer. Ideally, we skip spring altogether in the snow and just go right to warm, sunny days every day.
The Mile High. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Out in Colorado, beautiful. So why don't you maybe just give us a condensed version of your upbringing, your experience in Catholicism and that rabbit hole, and then what were some of the catalysts that served as you left the church, and
Yeah.
where are you at now, and how do you feel? Do you have any regrets? What's going on? What's going on with your heart and your mind right now?
Yeah, so I grew up in a cafeteria Catholic type of household. We attended church almost every weekend, but were never particularly devout. And into ninth grade, I made friends at the local youth group at my high school, kind of in the preparation for confirmation. I love reading. I've always loved philosophy and arguing, and went down the apologetics rabbit hole. So starting with Catholic Answers and going to the Novus Ordo, and then a little bit into my conversion, reversion, whatever you want to call it, discover this thing called the Latin Mass. And I loved the aesthetic of it, the community, and being part of this young, zealous movement. It became increasingly traditional to exclusively attending the Latin Mass. This whole time I knew that I was gay, but under church teaching, I can experience attractions, I just can't act on them. And so I was celibate in line with church teaching and converted a number of people to the faith. Eventually discerned to become a Carmelite monk. They wanted nothing to do with me because of experiencing same-sex attraction. And in this roundabout way, it was I'm glad that they had rejected me, but at the time was quite difficult. Ended up going out to a small Newman Guide college in California. It's like 160 students, a very devout Catholic. Met a lot of people who were actually raised in tradition for the first time, unlike many converts like myself. And then 2 years ago, attended Mass for the last time after a few questions on the more complicated way to put it is like, I've never found an epistemology that could ground dogmatic theology. The more like simple way to put that is just, I didn't find that I had evidence to meet the level of belief that the faith was asserting. Went through this kind of period of questioning, eventually left 2 years ago, and have been kind of throwing my life back on track since then. Love the life that I have now, and then started this YouTube channel to be one of the few ex-Catholic voices that actually took the faith seriously. Like, I was going to daily Mass, prayed all 4 mysteries of the Rosary daily, did Exodus 90 about 1.5 million times with people, and converted. I had a number of friends join the faith because of me. So I was kind of the ringleader of the Catholic groups that I was a part of, and haven't been back since. I'm still fascinated by religion. I think religion is a phenomenon. Whether or not we have good reason to believe the supernatural claims is another thing, but that's kind of the overall trajectory of my life.
Yeah, I want to ask about when did you realize that you were gay? Was that like a process? Was it a combination of things? Was there, like a moment where you're just like, this is who I am? How did that look, or how did that work?
Yeah. For me, I remember waiting in elementary school for the liking woman phase to finally hit. Because obviously in elementary school, you're not dating, but as you get older into elementary school and then middle school, my friends started dating women and talking about women. And then I was waiting. I was a little bit of a late bloomer. So I was like waiting finally to be attracted to women. And then it was about 7th grade, I realized the way that my friends were talking about women were the way that I felt about guys my same age. And so in 7th grade, found the label of gay. But from 7th to 9th grade, I think I told my parents and like one other person. It wasn't something that it's something that I knew was real, but yet didn't feel comfortable with it, or the words to explain it, or the environment to express it. And so when I joined the church, or had my reversion around 9th grade, I was never out to anybody in the Catholic world. I was never dishonest about it, but I knew hey, this is my experience, not my identity, as like Jason Everett would put it. And so through my time being a Catholic, it was obviously something that was top of mind, but I didn't really talk to many people about that except for a spiritual director here or there.
Yeah, how did your parents react?
They were supportive. In fact, they were more supportive of me when I was Catholic. Like they, from time to time, my parents would say, "Oh, and if you ever bring a guy home, we'd be happy to meet him." And in
Mhm.
my head, I was like, "I will never date a guy. That would be the worst conceivable thing." So they were respectful about my Catholic phase, but I think we're quite caught out of the blue about what is my son going down this rabbit hole for, and they never really got the Latin Mass thing. My dad went to a Latin Mass twice with me, and I think my mom also went a few times. And of course, the times that she attended had like the worst sermons imaginable from our local fraternity parish. And I was like, it's not that crazy, I swear. As one of the sermons was about how playing card games is essentially like this the sin of being idle, and then the other one was about how wearing pants was evil. So I think she was a little turned off by those two sermons. So
I'd call that scrupulosity. St. Francis de
yeah,
Sales talks about playing cards and dancing and
hmm
stuff, but he doesn't go insofar as calling it like intrinsically disordered
yeah,
or inherently evil. So there's obviously
hmm
nuance there and some gray area, but yeah, that's
yeah,
interesting that your parents, yeah, that's funny. But so this is what I'm interested in. So
hmm
you said you came to the realization or the self actualization maybe around seventh
hmm
grade ish, and then you
hmm
had a reversion in ninth grade, correct?
hmm
So how did you live your life with other Catholics in community, going to church? You know, your parents knew, but nobody else knew. As someone who was gay, like, how did that look?
hmm
How did that make you feel? Did you feel ostracized or anything like that? Or you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like maybe no one knew, I guess, but
hmm Yeah, I mean, in many ways, it I was never forced to have that conversation because nobody ever guessed that I was gay. And anytime people would ask about dates with women, there were women that I could say in the parish who were pretty, and like you can recognize somebody's beauty without
mhm,
being attracted per se. And so it tend to, if those conversations came up, dodge the question. At the start of my kind of getting into Catholicism journey through high school, um, at the Novus Ordo parish that I attended, um, they were very much of like the Father Mike Schmidt school of approach to this, which is we can, and actually we should go out of our way to make people that experience same-sex attraction feel welcome in this environment,
yeah,
while also loving them and wanting the best for them, which is going to be in line with the Catholic design or God's design for human sexuality. And so in those Novus Ordo settings, uh, never felt ostracized. It also helped that I was the ringleader of the group and I was doing all the talks and was kind of the de facto leader. So I wasn't ostracized because I like ran the whole joint. But as I started getting into more both online and then in person Latin mass circles, there is this approach that even being attracted to a member of the same sex is either a sign of a wound. And if you just fix the wound and actually cared about healing, you wouldn't be attracted to men. Or two, being attracted to men in some way was a deficiency.
mhm,
And so those environments essentially solidified my decision to not come out, because it was this. That's if my impression in the Novus Ordo communities that I was in. If I came out, I could be a full participating member. In Latin Mass communities, it would have been kind of like the, I guess we gotta deal with you type of vibe and be weirded out by it.
yeah.
Um, yeah, there's kind of a number of degrees to approach.
Yeah, there's a stark contrast between the Novus
hmm
Ordo community and the TLM community. Not
Yeah,
inherently or with everybody, but you know, the
yeah,
TLM has this sense of rigidity and Pharisaical tendencies,
hmm
whereas the Novus Order, you know, more tolerance, more mercy and love, you know.
yeah,
And I've known people in these TLM communities that they've been, I'm just using this word loosely,
hmm
but traumatized just
yeah,
because of it. I don't want to say cult like, it's not like a cult-like milieu, but at the same time, it kind of is because they feel
hmm
this sense of exclusivity to the to the detriment of others. Like if you're not a
hmm
TLMer, you know, if you're not one of us, then it's like you're just this liberal hippie, you know,
yeah,
Novus Ordo punk. You know what I mean? So, what I want to
hmm
ask you is your experience in the TLM
hmm
milieu and community or whatever. Did you have any, I don't know, experiences of like feeling guilty and feeling invalid or inadequate because of your sexual orientation and the way that the TLM looks at that?
Yeah, I mean the parish that I attended, it's I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but I think a lot of traditionalists like to LARP the idea of like turn of the 19th century type of aesthetic, whereas in Novus Ordo communities, people are much more focused on Jesus and a lot of the incidentals around what you how you dress and these other things are secondary to the idea of being a full participating member.
Mm,
Whereas in traditionalism, there's this like mystique and aura that you kind of have to play up. Like if you go to a Latin mass community, it's going to be all these guys in very buttoned up suits from like a 50s type of style. And all of their imagery is all around this like early 20th century type of masculinity. So I think in many ways, traditionalism fails to be Catholic in that it cares more about
yep,
an aesthetic than it does about what the church actually teaches.
yep,
Um, and there were in Novus Ordo communities when they would talk about hot button moral issues, let's say homosexuality, they would preface things with essentially like we're not saying everybody who experiences this attraction, but like we can separate or experience an identity, we can experience attraction and action. And so when they talk about the evil homosexual cabal out there. They kind of preface it, whereas in traditionalism was just everybody's in the same camp as moral degenerates, and that any sign of effeminacy is to be cast out and is always a sign of defect. And also in the Novus Ordo, both especially in online apologetics, there's not this sort of informal. So to say, in tradition, there is this informal imperative to become straight, right? Like if you really just healed from your wounds and you really were a proper man, you'd overcome your homosexual desires. Wherein in Novus Ordo communities, it's like, hey man, I don't know how you got here. I don't know much about your life, and you are welcome to be part of this table, regardless of if you're attracted to men or not. Whereas in tradition, like I said, they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and then throw the baby into a blender and then kind of go like, oh, people think we're mean. And you're like, well,
right.
yeah, because yeah.
You said traditionalism, I noticed, and there's
Hmm.
that ISM attached to it, which I
Hmm.
instantly think of ideology.
Hmm.
And a lot of people in that community, right, they turn the liturgy into an ideology where it's almost like they're worshiping the liturgy, not really worshiping God. And that
Hmm.
plays out in the aesthetics of, the three-piece suits and the chapel veils. And not that that's intrinsically wrong, but,
Hmm.
like I said, it's like this cult-like milieu. And it's just like they put so much emphasis on tradition where it's like pharisaical almost,
Yeah.
like so external to the expense of the interior.
Hmm.
That's why I've had kind of some bad experiences with those communities. Now, this is what I want to ask you because your
Hmm.
handle is GayXRadTrad, radical traditionalist, right?
Hmm.
Does this have anything to do with you stepping away from the church? Because you said it was a rabbit hole, okay?
Hmm.
And you don't have to tell me. I know
Yeah.
what you're alluding to, but can you maybe be more specific as to what that looked like, the rabbit hole part, and did that have a play into your leaving the church?
Hmm. I'd put it this way. I think from an outside perspective, even now, the only logical conclusion to this heaven and hell being so imminent in our lives, that the church having the fullness of the truth, is traditionalism. In that I from both seeing myself go down the rabbit hole and many other people, I like to picture it's like painting yourself into the corner where somebody converts to Catholicism and they have the room. And let's say the room is like all of the options you can do in life, all of the sort of life decisions you can make. And then as you become increasingly Catholic and then increasingly traditional, all of a sudden you hear more and more talks that are like, now actually doing any amount of work on Sundays could be a sin. And then you're like, okay. Then you like paint like 2 feet of the room. And then some other priest is like, actually wearing anything other than pants at all times is a mortal sin. And you kind of like paint that one off. And then you're like, and doing anything besides this might also be a sin. And then over time, you keep just like walking back the options that you have in life, because once you realize that heaven and hell are these real places,
Hmm.
even a little bit of doubt, like, could this be sinful? Could this not? Obviously, you'd err on the side of the not sinful thing. And so people become increasingly scrupulous with what can and can't send them to hell, and increasingly more and more traditional in their theology. Because as you start reading older and older church documents, they have a much harder in black and white stance on issues. And like I remember when I was becoming a Catholic at this Novus Ordo parish, I kept like reading these random quotes from older documents and like these references to an older time, this bygone era in the church. And then once I discovered the Latin Mass, and you're like, the church in many ways is very different in 2025 than it was in 1925 or 1825. They're drastically different in how they're lived out. And so I'd put it this way, that I think traditionalism is the logical conclusion of Catholicism taken seriously. While at the same time, uh, traditionalism leaves a much worse taste in people's mouths. And I think if I were straight and raised in a normal Novus Ordo Catholic parish, the chances of me still being there are much higher than having gone down the rad trad rabbit hole.
Yeah. Okay. That explains it. I'm glad you
Mhm.
fleshed that out. I didn't want to have some sort of
Yeah,
unjust
no.
speculation.
Yeah.
I mean, but just based on my experience, what I've observed, that there can be, some variables within the TLM communities and those
Mhm.
experiences that can really, I mean, they can scandalize, they can traumatize, you name it. And I know other
Yeah.
people, Cade, I've known other people that have left the church because they were raised in like an FSSP or an SSPX community,
Mhm.
and just the rigidity that, in this
Yeah.
obsession with the law, really what,
Mhm.
like just being holy. What they really do is they confuse the law with what the meaning of the law is, or the spirit of the law, and they
Yeah.
turn the law into an end of itself, rather than the end of the law is to increase in love, especially of God and neighbor. And then it's like, so you're worrying about these, should I wear these pants, or all these other scrupulous things that you were bringing up. Well, you're missing the whole point of why we're doing
Mhm.
what we're doing. It's not just to do this or to look holy, or to have acts of piety just for the sake of the acts of piety. It's to grow in love and to save souls. But anyways, I don't want to talk too
Mhm.
much. But so yeah, I think I know at least a little bit of why maybe you stepped away, and I can sympathize. I can sympathize,
Yeah.
absolutely sympathize with your situation. Now, I do want to bring up the Carmelite discernment,
Mhm.
because to me that's fascinating,
Yeah.
because I'm guessing this is either after high school or in high school.
Let's see. This would have been through the middle of the pandemic and just after. So this would have been my senior year into graduating from high school. Um, would have been that timeline.
Okay, so I'm just interested, or
Mhm.
intrigued rather, that what prompted you to want to even look into discerning being a Carmelite monk, just in general?
Yeah. I think as I became increasingly Catholic, I loved the idea of the priesthood. You get to live your life, studying theology, which I loved, learning history, and then getting to help people in their walk with the Lord, getting to save souls. And so as I became Catholic, the idea of having a vocation felt like a natural calling. And in many ways, throughout high school, with praying with people, with converting people, with studying the faith, I was in a certain way living like the trajectory towards the priesthood, and visited a number of seminaries. And then specifically with this traditional Carmelite monastery in Wyoming, I loved the Latin Mass, I loved traditionalism, and also loved contemplative prayer. And especially as I got into my junior and then senior year of high school, I would be at Mass early for adoration, and then attend daily Mass, and then attend adoration after Mass, and then be praying throughout the day and having my breviary out in public high school and praying my rosary while driving, and then spend an hour or two after school in contemplative prayer, and loved contemplative prayer. And the idea of a Carmelite monastery felt to just get to focus on prayer and study in the beautiful settings of the Rocky Mountains in this beautiful monastery sounded incredible. Getting to be, as they describe it, like the SEAL Team Six of spiritual warfare, and in particular their charisms and they care about liturgy, they care about beauty. And so talking to their vocation director, it seemed to be somewhat of a good fit. In the discernment process, or to be accepted anywhere, there's a very long paperwork process. And so began sending them my paperwork, and it's a lot of paperwork, and you pretty much give your entire life story, and everything was going well and talking to them until in one of the questionnaires it was like, do you experience same-sex attraction? I was like, yeah, because everything was perfectly honest in there. And then, do you act on that? The answer was no. And as soon as that paperwork came back, they replied within hours. And up to this point, communication had been days on end because they're cloistered, and so they don't have a ton of time. And so it was like a few days of communication between us talking or them sending me a message and me replying, whatever it was. And a handful of hours later, they replied back that you don't have a vocation here, you don't have a vocation anywhere because of this. Don't try to have a vocation. Which, depending on which Novus Ordo community you talk to, as long as you're not acting on your attractions and you're celibate, you're off to the races. As long as you're psychologically healthy, in this case, it was by virtue of you experience same-sex attraction, you are out of the running, despite having a prayer life and wanting to spend the rest of your life doing this.
So they said you don't have a vocation anywhere?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
Sorry.
Sorry.
That was a terrible thing to read, because so much of my life in the church and with my spiritual directors and with the local diocese was looking at various seminaries and discerning. And the thing I could never figure out, and the question when you asked a vocations director or a priest or whoever it was, can I experience same-sex attraction? And if I practice celibacy, can I be a full participating member of this community? And even in the Novus Ordo communities, there's a huge discrepancy depending on who you're talking to. Some dioceses basically ship you off to conversion therapy. Some say as long as you don't act on it, you can join the seminary as soon as you want. And so I could never figure out what's the real teaching. And since then, I've done a lot of looking into the documents, but the documents don't seem clear. People's interpretations of the documents don't seem clear. Across the entire church, both Novus Ordo and traditional, it's a very mixed bag and up to the individual, whoever's in charge of vocations for a particular community, whether it's a diocese or a monastery or a convent or what have you.
Yeah. Did you happen to have the opportunity to have a spiritual director during this or not?
During when I heard that news, no. I just had a spiritual director for a year and a half who, great, very conservative leaning, but not traditional, younger priest in the diocese at my local home parish. Great talking to him. And it was right in the transition period of getting the next pastor, who's also another younger conservative priest, and also on fire for the faith. So it was like right in between two sets of spiritual directors that this all kind of played out.
Was this kind of like the nail in the coffin for you leaving the church, or what was the final blow, or what really made you decide to leave?
Yeah, so this would have been mid 2020. And after that, it felt bad. But obviously, whether the Catholic Church has the fullness of the truth isn't one that's dependent on emotions or bad experience. Like, why would we leave Jesus because of Judas? And so stayed strong in the faith. Went out to this particularly conservative Catholic school on the Newman Guide, and that's kind of where two things ish happened. One was I finally saw people who were raised in traditional Catholicism or just were homeschooled in Novus Ordo communities. And it's quite easy as a convert, and I think most of Catholic YouTube in particular is full of converts, that it's rare to see somebody who was raised in either conservative or traditional circles. And though I had criticisms of, let's say, the liberal suburbs of Minneapolis, when I got to this college and saw the harm that homeschooling and living in a bubble did to kids, I was like, it gave me pause, but I still didn't leave there. That's also when I was out there that our local pastor at the fraternity parish here in Denver got arrested for internet crimes against children. And I saw for the first time, especially the cult-like tendencies of traditional Catholicism, because he was arrested. He never made a public statement of innocence, and then there was an online fundraiser, 150 grand for him that same week. But despite him not claiming anything, he was arrested by the feds. So I was like, this is a little culty. But then it was end of 2020. This was in 2022 is when I finally left. And that was over for this long period of looking at the church asks people who experience same-sex attraction this high barrier, which is you can't fall in love with somebody to whom you're attracted. You can't go on dates. You spend the rest of your life either celibate or in a mixed orientation marriage. So like the imperative is a very high one. And then I was looking at the actual proof, the evidence, whatever it is, and I felt like what they're asking is here and what they can prove is here. And then I was like, there's a discrepancy here. And both the advantage to Catholicism that a lot of people convert for is that we have answers to everything. The church has this charism of infallibility. But then also once you realize the church could be wrong on one issue, then it falls like a house of cards. And then in quick succession was kind of reevaluating the rest of everything. It was about a 6 month process of figuring out what it is that I believed, leaving the church, and then figuring out, do I want to stay Christian or not? So that's kind of the general timeline.
Yeah. Was it the teaching on homosexuality that you didn't think jibed with having the fullness of the truth or having sound moral theology? Or what do you mean the one doctrine that,
Yeah.
falls or whatever?
I would say that it was that issue that forced me to put a magnifying glass on Catholic epistemology.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't that it's this issue in isolation, but it's the epistemology of how we arrive to various moral conclusions and the teaching apparatus of the church that all of a sudden I was like, wait, what if we don't have, whether it's dogmas on the Immaculate Conception or that Jesus is one person, the Trinity, like what are the other teachings that are in the same bucket of huge level of confidence and small level of evidence? And then as I looked through the rest of the teachings, it was like, we have reasons, but I didn't feel like they were good reasons, even after having read pretty much every Catholic Answers book out there and read a number of
Sorry.
books in college and having gone down and watched pretty much all of Catholic apologetics YouTube at that point in my life. I always give the example of like a courtroom where in a courtroom, each side is going to have an infinite set of replies to everything. And the role of the jury isn't to figure out who has responses or who has arguments. It's to go who has better arguments, rather than just assuming that an argument makes it true. And so as I played this jury reading through apologetics a second time, because the first time in ninth grade, I went down the apologetics rabbit hole and felt like there was great reasons. And then after having studied this for years on end and going to college for it, being able to know much of the Catholic faith and then to refilter under a higher level of scrutiny this time and having known the arguments to begin with, I realized that the Catholic Church has answers. I just didn't feel like they were particularly compelling.
Yeah, you mentioned some teachings on morality in the past, whether it's from antiquity, Middle Ages, whatever, but
Yeah.
that were starkly different than maybe, say, in the last 20, 30, 40, well, since Vatican II, let's just go. I mean, so the whole development of doctrine, even on faith and morals, is that hard for you to kind of wrap your head around or to, does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it was looking and flirting with sedevacantism that made me actually like read through all of these older church documents in comparison to now. And I think it'd be fair to throw the assessment that if you have a plain text reading of documents from the time of Christ onwards, that they don't harmonize well. They seem to have very drastically different teachings. And it seems like the only way to harmonize and presuppose univocality is to play an insane game of mental gymnastics. And so in many ways, like I said, traditionalism is the logical conclusion of seeing the Catholic Church as the one true church. And then also, I think as you get down the sedevacantist rabbit hole or the sedeprivationist or all of the different, the seat is empty in some degree, you start realizing that like, hey, the Catholic Church both has historically changed church teaching drastically, and even to this day, in practice, doesn't have a clear list of what one must believe to be Catholic. As my friend Kevin Non Tradicath points out, that it seems like a shell game where a lot of apologists will sell the Catholic Church as we have the charism as of infallibility, but if we don't have an infallible list of infallible teachings, we're in the same position of we don't actually know what the correct teachings are if we can't know what the perfect Catholic Church teachings are, in the same way where if you used to throw out there that the Bible, when properly understood, is without error, the question isn't like the error part. The question is when understood properly. And we don't know how to do that. But then you go, well, the church can interpret. And then you realize that the church has both historically and to this day had drastically different interpretations of scripture. And we can't actually know what it is that the church teaches. So it seems like we're all kind of in square one, which is people decide which beliefs they're going to believe.
Interesting. So are you aware of St. Thomas Aquinas's implicit faith, his teaching on implicit faith? With
You'd have to refresh me on that.
So yeah, because if you, I mean, how many Catholics are there right now? 1.4 billion. I mean, not all of us are theologians and bona fide apologetics or apologists, rather. You know, we got 7-year-olds. We have people that are senile. We got an eclectic range, let's just say, of intellectual capacity. Well, what suffices, is an assent of our intellect to what the church teaches. It's called an implicit faith. We don't need an explicit, an explicit oral, like creedal encapsulation of everything the Catholic Church has ever defined dogmatically.
A verbal enumeration.
Right. So you mentioned, I think you said an infallible list of infallible dogmas. Is that what you said? Or did I hear that wrong?
Yeah. The Catholic Church often posits we have this charism of infallibility, right? The magisterium, both in its ordinary and extraordinary forms, and in sense of Vatican I, with this idea of ex cathedra statements. A lot of people sell the church as we know what we have to believe as Catholics, until you get inside of the Catholic world, and then you realize faithful Catholics who say that they're in line with the Vatican disagree on large theological and moral issues in a mutually exclusive way, and can't seem to come to a uniform interpretation of what one must believe in order to be Catholic. It seems like everybody has a different list of what are the mandatory and infallible teachings of the Catholic Church. And as an example, Jimmy Akin, in many of his videos, when he's pressed on the magisterium, is like, we define that as a clue that something might be infallible. And then you're like, well, you kind of play this game of like might be and could be and is assigned that. And then we're more or less just doing the Protestant thing, but in a narrower range, right? Protestants have a larger gambit of negotiable beliefs, and Catholics have a narrower gambit, but at the same time, they disagree in mutually exclusive ways, especially as you get into trad circles. It doesn't seem to be uniform. And if we can't know what the list of if we don't have the correct list of the correct teachings, we're in the same boat. So we have an incorrect list about the correct teachings. We can't actually know the correct teachings to begin with. So we have this epistemological gray zone and in quicksand that people get stuck in. And it seems like nobody actually knows what the answer is. I put it differently. People say they know, and then the other people on their same side say that they know. And then the next guy over says that they know. So it's like, can y'all get your ducks in order before you tell other people what to believe? Like,
well, I mean, but with all due respect, we're lay apologists. I am not. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a historian. I'm not a part of the. Well, I guess the lady in some very limited sense is part of the magisterium, but so I'm not going to pretend to give you an answer that's going to satisfy or placate you. You know what I mean? I mean, I can give you my best shot. But like with Jimmy Akin, though, I think, because I think I've heard him talk about this. So like it's very specific language in papal documents and in ecumenical councils of like, we proclaim, promulgate, define. It's just this like binding language. In the Bible, whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. So it's that binding language. And likewise, the canons usually of the councils, the ecumenical councils, are infallible as well. And then, like you said, the ex cathedra statements. But like I said before, all one needs is to make an act of implicit faith. Just basically say like, yeah, I believe that which the church teaches as being dogmatically revealed or whatever. That suffices. You know what I'm saying? So really, it's like, do we need to get in this quibble about this list? I don't think so. I mean, I think it would be edifying to know like exactly what's de fide and what's not, you know. But yeah, and then I don't know if are you familiar with Ludwig Ott,
I'm not, no.
Fundamentals of Theology? So, well, actually, let me tell you this. Do you know
Mhm.
of the channel Scholastic Answers?
Oh, yes.
So he's your age,
Mhm.
and he will give you better answers than I can. And he's
Yes.
yeah. So especially when it comes to this, because we're talking systematic fundamental theology,
Mhm.
and I know Ludwig Ock talks about different levels of dogma and what's binding, what we need to know. So that list that you're bringing up, there's
Mhm.
different gradations of de fide dogmatic promulgations or whatever. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'm just rambling on. But
Yeah. And
um,
there's people that all have their STLs looking at, these issues. Or the joke is always like, "Oh, I went to Rome and got my STD from a priest," is
mm,
a joke for the outside world. Because to become a theologian, you have to have your sacred theology licensure, which is STD, depending on which acronym you're using. And so a lot of people study in Rome, and so the joke is like you go to Rome to get
yeah.
an STD.
Well,
There's
you could do that.
yeah, you could get 2 different types of STDs while in Rome
Yeah.
from priests there. But the point being, as
Oh,
you
I
get
wasn't talking
into
about the priest. Those are your words.
oh,
Those are
yeah,
your words.
that's my words.
I was
Somebody
thinking
can
about like people in the streets
yes.
outside of like the because it's dude, it's prostitutes are ubiquitous over there, man. Like
Yeah.
outside of the Vatican or whatever. Sorry.
Yeah, and as you get into, like, the traditional world, if I think your position on faith, like, you just have to have this implicit recognition of whatever the church teaches, I'm gonna go for that. The question becomes when you have contradictory voices inside of these higher end theological discussions, and they
Mm,
all disagree with each other and in
yeah.
a mutually exclusive way. And that's where I both think that when a lot of trads are like, well, if ever becomes traditional, like our world is going to be, or the church is going to have this renaissance. It's like, no, like the most convincing way to put it is how you put it with whatever the church teaches, I'm there for. And then as a theology nerd like myself and many other people who study this, like you get into the weeds and you realize like it's just this pile of like tumbleweeds in the middle of the desert and you're
Yes.
looking every which way and everybody disagrees on everything
Yep.
and not on a we can disagree or we can agree about what can be disagreed upon, but that even the categories of what can and can't be disagreed or agreed upon are then disagreed upon and then in mutually exclusive ways. And that's kind of like the hallmark of traditionalism are these like infinite both liturgy and theological wars over the most niche things on planet Earth.
Right, right.
This like overzealous prosecution of papal documents from the 1500s, which I think is more intellectually honest, but also they shoot themselves in the foot because all trads care about is fighting each other. And then the Novus Ordo folks are the ones that can like evangelize the outside world and do Bible in a year. And then trads are kind of like lobbing theological grenades at the other 4-letter acronym parish down the street.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the different school of theological speculations between different religious orders like excuse me, the Dominicans, the
Mhm.
Jesuits? Well, they like, and then Thomas and Scotus and Molinus and all
Yeah.
that stuff. Well, they all, in a sense, they weren't, they didn't have uniformity.
Mhm.
However, they had the guardrails where they didn't get too far outside of the guardrails where
Yeah.
their end goal was for the study of God in his revelation. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So as long as we're not, fighting so much as to, come up with novel accretions and
Yeah.
doing disservice to the deposit of faith, we can have that tension. It's a healthy tension and actually makes us
Mhm.
come to a clear common point of view. So yeah, like
Yes. That
theological
would be awesome.
yeah, theological speculation is it's rampant in the church. You're gonna get
Mhm.
oh gosh, just an infinite amount of different point of views, and
Yeah.
some are just going to flatly contradict each other. Dude, we have people teaching heresy in the church. It's
Yeah.
like it's not like it's it's not like it's a secret.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? But that just shows why we need a magisterium. Just for that sake. But yeah, so I know what you're saying. there does seem to be a lot of conflict and contradictions out there. That's why when it comes down to it, an implicit assent of faith, rather than like, oh my gosh, we have all these lay apologists and lay theologians telling me different things. Well, this is really confusing. Well, don't listen to all that. Like, I mean, honestly, if you really, I mean, you can listen to these people piously and even with vain curiosity, but make sure your conscience is formed to be like, well, okay, that's kind of heretical. I'm not going to listen to that, or at least take it for gospel. But then really, I mean, yeah, give your assent to the church. I mean, I know that doesn't mean much to you, and that's fine. I don't expect it to mean much to you, but yeah, I told, dude, I sympathize with you, man. I really do. It's not like I don't understand where you're coming from at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's frustrating. And it's an enigma. It'd
be nice if God could just fax down teachings instead of like interpretations of various documents from both long ago and currently. Like, as soon as you go down the like what was Vatican II type of rabbit hole, was it a pastoral council, was it an ecumenical council, what are teaching, what's not, what do we do with Dei Verbum, what do we do with religious liberty, like that is exhausting. It turns off the outside world, and it also destroys faith. Like, I think the easiest way to stay religious is to focus on this transcendent idea of worship in a particular deity, and then the particular details and nuances, you kind of leave that for the other people to go down the rabbit hole. As they say, the worst, the best atheists are canon lawyers, because once you get into like canon law, canon lawyers just go down this like rabbit hole when you're like, what in the world are we dealing with here with like these various codes of canon law and becoming like God's lawyer? It's like, man, the more convincing thing is love this idea of Jesus, love the people around you, and have an awesome community is a way better way to lead a church than like, awesome, let's go to page like 715 of the Summa and squabble over the ideas of Immaculate Conception throughout history. Like, name your church Immaculate Conception and don't go too far into the details would be my advice if somebody's Catholic and wants to stay Catholic. Like, don't look too hard into the details and like the nuances of things, and just live your faith. Is a much happier and more long-term way to do religion.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I know some wise people that have told me, apologetics will send you straight to hell if you're not careful. Likewise with just, theological speculation, because what it does is it puffs you up. Your ego is inflamed. And so like I was alluding to earlier, like a 7-year-old with implicit faith, if you go up to, I say 7 because, age of reason, but a 7-year-old, right, has the theological virtue of faith, hope, and love. But namely, am I cutting out?
You're dropping a few frames here and there, or maybe I am.
Here. We'll just go. It's fine.
Yeah.
But like you're alluding to the nuances in Vatican II and the qualms with St. Thomas Aquinas on the Immaculate Conception and all this stuff. I mean, you go up to a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, they don't even know what the Summa is, let alone Vatican II or Lumen Gentium or Dei Verbum. They're not going to know what that is. Let alone like argue over it. You know what I mean? And so in that sense, it's like holiness, right? This isn't to undermine, doctrine or dogma and the scent of our faith and the creeds and all that. But at the end of the day, you're going to be judged on not your faith, not what you know, not dogma, love. You're going to be judged on love. That's it. And I'm not saying that these aren't important things, but you're not going to be judged on. Can you reiterate what you memorized in Vatican II? Or
tell me about the Didache on page 9. What did they have to say about this particular nuance?
I mean, I don't know. I don't like to tell people what to do, but just, I don't know, like that stuff. If I were to ever to get in that position, what you were talking about, I would just quit all of this, because it wouldn't be worth it. What's worth while for me is, getting to heaven and getting others to heaven. So, apologetics and theology, man, dude, piss on it if it's, going to send you to hell, or probably don't even believe in hell, but what, you know what I mean?
And that's where I always say that the church's teaching on homosexuality wasn't that issue in particular, but it was that issue through which I had to look at what specifically are the guardrails on on this particular teaching, right? You get into trad circles and they're going to quote older documents, and by older, I mean like 2005, which seems to imply that homosexual attractions are a sign of, what do they call it, spiritual immaturity, and that these can be overcome as soon as 2005. And so that's the issue that forced me to look at the fact, like, we're told that there's guardrails, and then you look at the guardrails, and then people are all fighting each other over the guardrails. And then you realize that insofar as the church has taught on homosexuality, doesn't seem to be at a higher degree of certainty or stability than teachings on the death penalty or usury or these other issues that have changed. And you're like, wait, so things can develop, things can change, but what can and can't change depending on the circumstances, and what specifically are the guardrails? And then you look at how the church teaches, and it seems to be a more and more confusing mess, like the deeper down you go. So that's why I say, like, it wasn't, I want to be gay, ergo leave the church. It was, I want to be a faithful member of the church and live my life. And so let's read every single document on this issue. And it seemed to be a contradictory word salad of half-baked, semi-authoritative documents that kind of made me look and realize, oh, what if it was like this for nearly every other issue out in the church today?
Yeah. Would you say that all people, to some extent, level of magnitude varying, do all people have sexual inclinations here or there?
Yeah, I think most people, most people experience sexual attraction, and of those people, it seems like people are on some sort of spectrum or some sort of bell curve that tend to congregate around near heterosexuality, and that a small but not statistically insignificant number of people seem to have stable sexual orientations in a near homosexual orientation.
Okay. Because I'm just,
Mhm.
I think that everybody, it just depends on genetic dispositions, environments, just whatever.
Yeah.
From time to time, how, to what extent everyone has homosexual inclinations. Like everybody,
Mhm.
every single person, save maybe Jesus and Mary. But yeah,
Yeah.
every single person. And I'm not trying to hear like validate or justify you or anything like
Yeah.
that. I'm just saying, like, it just, the way that it was handled by like those Carmelites,
Yeah.
and how, what did you say? Like if you have a homosexual inclination, you're spiritually cursed or something. What were you saying?
It's a sign of spiritual immaturity, I believe, is how the 2005 document hashes that out.
Wait, what document said that?
It is, and I have a podcast titled "Can Gay Men Become Catholic Priests?" And it's a 2005 document, somewhere around like criteria for discerning the priesthood for men who experience homosexual attractions, and it's a must be like a 6-page document written. Now this would be under Benedict, I would believe, at the time, and that's kind of the most recent iteration of what that means. And there's some documents in there. It says that uh, essentially the point is you have to have 3 years of like sobriety from homosexual thoughts to enter the seminary, and that homosexual orientation prevents you from relating authentically with both men and women as a priest in order to become a father. Which is, there's this Catholic school of thought that actually, to like be attracted to members of the same sex and be okay with that is unchaste, because you're saying that Jesus doesn't have dominion over it. And there's this long implicit set of conversion therapy within the church, which is, if I'm the church and I want to keep people in the church, I'm throwing my money at Father Mike Schmitz, who's, you can experience same-sex attraction. I don't know where they come from. You're welcome at the table, full stop. And then as you like get beyond Father Mike Schmitz in terms of conservative circles, then you get into this weird like psychological reparative reintegrative therapy like rabbit hole around homosexuality, or homosexual desires are just a sign of spiritual immaturity. They can be overcome, or they might be transitory, but to be permanent in them. Yeah, there's it's like the infinite word soup and salad on this issue, almost like Olive Garden. We have unlimited soup and salad on this issue.
Well, what's interesting to me is like, you might have to send me that document, is all of us have inclinations and proclivities to sin, all of us.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now, and I didn't mean that in a derogatory sense to you, but I've had many inclinations to leave my wife, to kill my wife. I mean,
Yeah.
those are just inclinations, though.
Mhm.
That's all it is. Like, I'm not trying to, yeah, they're not good in and of themselves, but they're not sinful. They're not
Mhm.
sinful. And so for someone to say that that's a sign of spiritual immaturity, to me, is just fundamentally wrong. It really is. It
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense, because some of the holiest people have the most disordered inclinations you could even imagine, or
Yeah.
thoughts, or whatever you want to call them. Temptations too, but it's just like,
Mhm.
that doesn't define the level of maturity in your spiritual life. Like, that just does not make sense.
I'm on Team Eric with this one.
Well, you got to send me that document, man. I'll do a video on it for you. I'll rebut
Okay.
the heck out of it. Was it Pope
Yeah.
Benedict? I might have to.
Yeah, so it wasn't authored by Benedict. It was authored during Benedict's reign. And I'll send you the podcast that we did looking at a few different documents on this particular issue. And there's this like anthropology and etiology around like the psychology of this idea of people having permanent same-sex attraction. Because as the Catechism says, the psychological genesis remains unknown, if I'm remembering correctly. There are a small but non-negligible number of people that experience predominant homosexual attractions. I believe I quoted the Catechism right on
Okay.
that one. So, yeah, even on this issue in the church, depending on who you talk to, you get some wildly different answers
Yeah.
on this issue. And my work tends to step on the toes of the people within the church that are pro conversion therapy. And both have been told that my work kind of screws with their ministry, and have also been like threatened with lawsuits by these people. So they like the idea of the fact that we can change people that experience same-sex attraction. But to your earlier point, one of the most widely circulated books on discernment, called To Save a Thousand Souls, which is kind of standard issue for every vocation director for most dioceses in the US, and you can get them for free online because all these discernment groups like send them out like hotcakes. They take the position, and the author basically says most people from time to time, even straight men, have had dreams about other men. And so, like, to an extent, everybody in passing has thought about members of the same or the opposite sex in a sexual way. And that as long as you're stable in your celibacy, seems to be like okay for most vocation directors. But yeah, there's like a whole other rabbit hole that could be an hour and a half conversation, which is you might like the podcast that we did. It's like an hour and a half on a few different documents on this issue.
So you did say, I don't know if you were qualifying, but you did say permanent inclinations, meaning like chronic. I mean,
Permanent as in stable. There's this idea of sexual fluidity out there, which is, do people who report being gay younger in life, do they maintain that label through the rest of their life? Is what that means. Like, you have the idea of the Kinsey scale, not to go too far into Kinsey and John Money, which Jason Everett always loves bringing up all of these folks, that most people, like, if you have a 1 out of 10 is you are exclusively attracted to members of the same or of the opposite sex, and 10 is you're exclusively attracted to members of only your sex. Most people tend to congregate around the ends, right? Some people might be a 10, but also a 9 means like out of 100 people that you might find attractive out of the course of your life, 10 of them might be men. Or if you're 50-50, somebody who would most likely to use the label bisexual would be kind of a mix of that. Some people are 3s, some people are 8s, is just kind of a scale. And a lot of people like to say that the sexuality is fluid, meaning like, oh, you might be exclusively attracted to men now, but that might change. You might like grow out of it. But it seems like all the studies point to the idea of relative stability in sexual orientation, where people might go from an 8 to a 9 to a 7 in their life, but they're not going from an 8 to a 1 or a 1 to a 10, is what that means. The 2005 document uses the terms permanent and transitory, and uses the example of same-sex attractions overcame in youth that are transitory, but then there are also people with permanent same-sex attractions, which means for the rest of your life, you're going to be either exclusively or predominantly attracted to members of the same sex. Not to get too far down the queer philosophy rabbit hole on that one.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So
Mhm.
when it comes to Seminaries, directors of
Mhm.
vocations vetting potential seminarians and through application processes. Do you think it's prudent of them, especially in light of the priest scandals that have happened, going back,
Mhm.
I don't, who knows how long, that there's a reason why they do that? And it's not like to be marginalizing, but just to protect the possibility of a future scandal, or are you on that? You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
I think they have a perceived reason. Like I don't think that the vocation directors wake up and arbitrarily decide that we're going to exclude men who experience same-sex attraction. Um, I don't think that the statistics bear it out in any way that those who experience same-sex attraction are any more likely to abuse minors. Because the real scandal in the church wasn't that priests are having sex with other people that are capable of consent. The problem is predation on minors, and we know that statistically speaking, it's not at a higher rate among people with same-sex attraction. Now, in the Catholic psychological zeitgeist, where all of sexuality is steamrolled into this clear dynamic, I get I get the logical steps that they get to their conclusion with, but I think when we look at the stats and apply any degree of scrutiny, it tends to fall apart quite quickly.
Sure, sure, sure. Thanks.
Mhm.
All right. What would it, okay, take this question as maybe a
Yeah.
little tongue in cheek. I don't know. You don't have to answer it either, but what would it take for you to come back to the Catholic Church?
Yeah, there's two answers to that. One is I think all of us make decisions that work for us. And I think when people convert, they often report this. I found the correct intellectual reasons. But I think in reality, most people convert because they like the community, they like the heuristics, they like that they have grounding for their life, they find meaning, they find purpose, and kind of the intellectual reasons are superfluous. And I think in the same way that if I found the most amazing Catholic community that made my life better, I think I would join. Intellectually speaking, what I have to find is much more stability, much more consensus, and much more a much higher resolution view of the teaching apparatus of the church to actually come to determinations instead of this word salad. And we'll go into this on my channel. What would it take me for to believe in God is
Mm.
a lot more than kind of this vague amorphous concept that works conveniently outside of any investigable process without any sort of reliability. Like God seems to only operate in the shadows, um, and with Jesus seems to not be the greatest evidence, both in terms of contemporary reports by the apostles and also secondary reports in the second and third and fourth centuries. Like the evidence for Jesus seems weak at best, even when we throw in Tacitus and Josephus and the dating of the New Testament. And then on the idea of the church, I would expect the church to actually be unchanging and to actually be able to teach with authority on issues and then keep people in line, or at least have clear determinations. Is kind of like the three steps on the intellectual side. And on the practical side, if there was a dope group of people that wasn't toxic, like of course I'm gonna join a dope group of people. Like
Man, we're dope, right? We're from
the
Minnesota, man.
that's true. If everybody I think if the trads could stop listening to the trad people
Yeah.
and just listen to Father Mike and kind of the new evangelization, very buttoned up, PR savvy world, it would be a little more friendly on there. Now, I think ultimately, as much as I like to kind of throw some critiques at traditionalism and let the Novus Ordo folks off early, in the same way, everybody has a negotiation of the mandatory beliefs and this arbitrary set of boundary maintenance. And a lot of Novus Ordo Catholics are like, we just focus on Jesus. And then you're like, what does that actually entail? And in the same way, they still have boundaries on what is or isn't allowed. I was talking to a Protestant. I was sitting at a friend's house, and there's a Protestant there, and he was doing the whole like, you don't have to be part of a denomination, you just have to love Jesus. And then I was asking him questions, and he very clearly had a theology of like what is or isn't negotiable to properly understand and be saved. In the same way, even in Novus Ordo communities, they have very strict rules, just a different set of what's negotiable and non-negotiable. And as one of my co-hosts on the podcast points out, that at the end of the day, all Catholics are cafeteria Catholics, right? Every trad, every JP2 era, every liberal Catholic looks at this huge gamut of church teaching on a variety of issues throughout the ages and decides what's mandatory, what's non-mandatory, what am I going to emphasize, what am I going to de-emphasize, and negotiates their particular version of faith. So even though I use the term cafeteria Catholic to describe my upbringing, in the same way, at every stage of in and out of Catholicism, everybody has a different set of negotiated boundaries in their particular social community. Yeah, if that point makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
What makes it easier for me is I just believe everything the church, whatever comes out of the church. And I'm not talking about like
Yeah.
theological speculation from
Mhm.
saints even, or doctors even, or, lay theologians. No, I'm just, if the church teaches it, I'm not gonna question it. I know that
Yeah.
sounds like naive and just kind of gullible, but it just makes it more simple for me. But hey,
Yeah.
you want to do some fun questions or what? Or
That
did you
sounds
have
like a
any?
plan.
Did you have anything to ask me or to? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like cut you
No,
off.
no,
But
you're good.
anything you
No,
want
let's move into the next set of questions that you have there.
Yeah, the fun questions. So, um, I'm gonna try to. So some of them will obviously have to do with Catholicism because I mean
Yeah.
that's your upbringing. So I
Yeah.
mean that's just that or whatever, and then maybe some stuff with Minnesota. But who who was or is your favorite Carmelite saint?
Ooh, who's my favorite Carmelite saint? I mean, this is a whole other rabbit hole where I very much sound like Jordan Peterson, where it's like who counts as being part of a particular religious order.
What?
Um,
No, come on.
it's a very like I don't know. Even the idea of most religious orders are like a reform of a reform of a reform.
So
Um,
yeah,
I like John of the Cross. I think I read most. I think he was somebody that was much higher up in there in terms of his establishing ideas. Teresa Lisieux, I found compelling-ish, but the whole thing reeked of this is unmitigated OCD, like perpetuated and inflamed by religious meanings. Uh, Avila's interesting. Yeah, it's even like the idea of like the group that I was looking for or was wanting to discern with, they're not even technically part of the Carmelite order because they're trying to revive these older Carmelite rules. And so they're not technically they don't have the lineage. They kind of just like popped up as an independent group because they wanted to revive these long since um abrogated sets of Carmelite life. And so it's like even like yeah, what counts as Carmelite?
do they have
Um
Vatican approval, that order you're talking about?
Yeah, so they are approved by the local diocese. So
Mhm,
they're not like off on their own island, but
mhm.
they liked the particular bishop. And technically they are I believe all of them are essentially the lay brothers are people that have just made private vows because they don't have this lineage in the group. Now they obviously have ordinations, but they bring in somebody to do the ordinations. They don't, yeah, they're not technically part of like the living Carmelite tree.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, unlike in Denver here, I attended Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and then they have a monastery a few blocks away with this older group of traditional Carmelite um, woman religious, and they are part of the living tree of Carmelites, and there's all these like descending orders of authority and who comes from what in this family tree of religious orders.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring up St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul when we're talking about the hiddenness of God. So
Perfect.
get ready for that, man. All right, St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine?
Aquinas, he sounds smarter. Augustine seems to have some better actual like spiritual advice. I mean, as Aquinas found out that all of his work was but straw in the wind, and then Augustine seems to have some heavier hitting and also a little bit more of an accessible story than the Catholic ideal of having six scribes at a time that you're like right you're dictating to different scribes like Aquinas that are writing stuff on on these weird shapes of leather that have been thrown out so that you can fit everything in the Summa together. Yeah, I think say Aquinas has like the aura that Catholics go to, and Augustine has better advice to actually stay Catholic.
Interesting. Yeah, I go Saint Augustine. He's my confirmation saint. But
Aquinas was mine.
oh, nice. So how about Minnesota State Fair or Renaissance Festival?
Renaissance Festival, State Fair, little overpriced.
Right.
I went there once, and the one time I went on this like health craze because going to the general, you go to the Minnesota State Fair and you're like, dang, I'm in shape and I never want to end up like this. And then the Renaissance Fair is like more fun and you see cooler things, and it's not kind of like the lumbering giants of the State Fair. That's gonna get me canceled, but that's my hot take.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's funny. Let me see. I'm trying to think of another question. Cats or dogs?
Own a dog, visit cats. That's
Interesting.
because cats are fun to pet if you're visiting a friend's house and they're friendly.
Right.
But they're too distant to be like your buddy. Dogs are your buddy, but sometimes that's more work because you got to take care of them more. Versus cats, when you take care of them, just like they do whatever. So I like visiting petting cats, but I'd never have one as a pet.
Okay. Crystal meth or cocaine? I'm kidding.
You want long acting.
Yeah. I think that's it, man. Unless you have anything else for me or any questions or any comments, concerns, call 1-800.
1-800 got answers. What's the billboard all across like the Midwest? It's like 1-800. It's like a Protestant
Truth. 1888 truth or something. Yeah. Or got truth, or I don't know, something truth.
Yeah.
Dude,
that'd be
kind of a funny story. Do you know who Cameron Bertuzzi is? Capturing Christianity. I don't know if you know, but he called that number and he has like a short video on it. Like he was going back and forth with some dude on the phone, apologetics. It was pretty funny, but
it's interesting that Protestants and Catholics take very different apologetical routes. The Protestant route is just like asserting the gospel message and in more and more certain terms. And then the Catholic approach is just like defining everything and being like, well, as the joke is, anytime Catholics come up with or see a contradiction, they just magically each word splits into 4 definitions. And so the Catholic or every Summa question is like, so what do you mean by cleaning the dishes? And then you're like, first it can be said that cleaning means this. And also cleaning means this. And I answer that cleaning actually means this third thing. Dude. Anytime I joke and tell people about Thomism, it's just like once somebody starts numbering definitions, you're talking to a Thomist.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I know what you're talking about, but to be fair, many words have multiple definitions, but it gets a little out of control there. I think I have one more question. Oh gosh, it just slipped my mind. What the heck was it? Shiver me timbers. I forgot. Sorry, man. I totally forgot.
I guess I was God stole that question right out of you. Or was it?
Oh gosh, what was it? It's gonna bug me. It's gonna bug the living daylights out of me. Anyways,
the question on faith or on life? Was it something on Thomism? Because I went on a rabbit hole on the Catholic versus Protestant apologetic rabbit hole.
No, I don't think it was on Thomism. Yeah, I that's all I got. I don't know. It just seriously just slipped my mind. I'll think of it later tonight.
Yeah, you'll send an email at like 1 a.m. I finally remembered.
Yeah. All right, man. Thanks for coming on my channel, Cade. It was real, man. I appreciate your openness, your transparency. I think you have a good soul, man. I think you're fine. I think everything's great. And yeah, you edified me a lot.
I've spent years nerding out on this stuff, and even though I don't dogmatically believe, it's still endlessly fascinating because, as you said, there's 2 billion Catholics out there. In many ways, the Catholic Church still shapes how the world plays out, and so to be knowledgeable about that, and also, what am I going to do with 6 years of my life reading every book on the shelf? I got to find some way to can't just throw out all of that knowledge. I always joke that being an ex-traditional Catholic is like a party trick. Because talking to like secular people, and then you kind of like hint at this idea of wanting or having had wanted to become a Catholic priest, and everybody kind of like looks at you, and then you get to like throw out random Catholic fun facts. Is a fun party trick in secular company.
Yeah, dude. I mean, you're gonna always have that knowledge, and you use it to your benefit. Use it to your benefit. Oh, I was gonna ask, Colorado or Minnesota?
Colorado all the way.
Ew.
Best advantage in the summer, you can leave the doors to your house open and not die of mosquito bites
Oh,
because
there
it's
you go.
dry out here. I
Yeah.
remember my first time being out here. We're at a family friend's house, and they had like their windows wide open. And after sunset, it was like we got to shut them. And then it was like, nah, it's dry out here. There's no mosquitoes. Unlike the drone right at sunset and in twilight in Minnesota, and then you kind of hear the start emerging from the woods.
I don't miss
and
that.
Then, yeah,
I don't miss that.
yeah.
All right, man. Well, yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you on your channel.
Indeed. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, Cade. Hold on just a second here.